On today's podcast of Data for All, we will be talking about using data for good.
Or evil. Welcome to the Data for All podcast. I'm Charlie Yielding.
And I'm Charlie Apigian, where we want to empower you to think different with data.
And on today's podcast, we are discussing how to use data for good.
And we will define what we mean by data for good in different contexts.
Such as?
Well, we got to really think about data for good. And does that mean it's for the community? Is it for you? Or from a corporate perspective, is it for profit, which might be a little bit on the evil side?
Oh, yeah. So like, you never really think about data as evil. So how would you define the data in an evil context?
Well, I'll take the more academic approach to this. So it's not that we're literally, Dr. Evil in a movie and we want $1 million. But a lot of times it goes to using data in an unethical way, or knowing that data has bias built into it based on people's demographics or gender, race, things like that, and keeping that in there when you probably should exclude that because it's not fair to the individual.
So intentionally creating a lack of transparency, not applying ethics to the application of data and where it lives and where it goes.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and I know we had the great conversation in episode 2 about who owns your data, where it's captured, and we talked a lot of ethical issues in that case where you can kind of see how data can be used in an evil way, because a lot of times your data is being used and you don't even know it. Right.
Yeah. One of the best examples is Facebook.
Sure.
Like in the past, they've collected data and experimented on their user base without the prior knowledge. And there are specific rules around that states that if you're going to behaviorally experiment on a group of people, you have to have their permission, and they didn't get any of that.
Yeah. And so that really is when I think the data for evil became a topic for the everyday person.
Mm-hmm. But we're not here to talk about that today. Today is data for good.
Oh, my favorite subject.
Well, it is
for sure.
It is right up your alley, since this is where you live every day.
It is, and just to give people some context to this, again, I do live in the academic world, and for the last few years, specifically for the last year, I've been at Belmont University here in Nashville, Tennessee. And the reason I came to Belmont was very simple. I had the opportunity to create what we're calling a data collaborative, and it has 2 main missions. And one isn't going to surprise you. It is data for all. It is giving everybody at Belmont and beyond the data skills that they need to be successful in their careers. The second is data for good. And what we mean by that is, how can we tackle hard problems within our community, but take a data-driven approach to that so that it's truly actionable. And so it sounds like a lot of the themes that we've talked about. It's something obviously I'm very passionate about. I love being in an academic role, but what I love these days is the opportunity to look at a hard problem, talk to everybody that's part of that. That goes to people that are doing it within the nonprofit space, within government, and identifying ways to empower them with better data, to make better decisions, to affect change for the better.
So on a personal level, then, that's kind of what we were talking about the other day with tracking like alcohol consumption in order to get better sleep.
Sure.
Like you can positively use data on a personal level to do the same thing. But your focus at the data collaborative is community level.
It is, but that doesn't mean the personal component is something that we should gloss over. And so let's start there. So we'll talk about personal, and we'll talk about what it means to be in the community, because the one thing that I feel very strongly about is the two. You can't separate the two. For example, Charlie, I can't tell you to be more active and to eat better if you live in an area that's a food desert, that has no sidewalks, that if you go out at night, it's not safe. You work 2 jobs, you got to pick up your 3 kids, and on the way home, the only good food that you can get them that's affordable is McDonald's. how can I fault you for having bad food choices? Because the community that you're in isn't conducive to a healthy lifestyle. So the individual with the community is vital, the connection between the two. So you got to talk both when we do this. So let's start with the personal part and tell me what you think of when you think of how can data personally be used for good for you?
So my biggest personal use of data is in health. So I try to eat appropriately, drink appropriately, sleep appropriately, and all that kind of stuff, so I can maximize my own personal performance. Because if I've got goals in life, like I'm only hurting myself by not treating myself well. But I also have the ability to tell myself lies and say that I'm doing these things when I'm actually not.
Sure.
And so I capture data and information in order to kind of bust through my own self-imposed story. And oftentimes it'll be a difficult realization when I actually come to it. But at the same time, I feel justified in all of the work that goes into capturing that data sometimes. And so, because I I have a mixture of written data, because I'm journaling, and then biometric data that comes from my watch and sleep tracker and all that kind of stuff too. And so I'm really hyper focused on that from a personal use perspective. But then I get into personal process, like how I capture information and how I save long-term ideas and grow those ideas and things like that. And that's all data-centric in my life as well. So if, for example, if I'm going to capture information, what's the best way to go about that? I know that the least amount of time possible is the best for me. I guess that's the best way to say it.
Sure.
So you heard me earlier tell Google to remind me something about something on Monday. And if I don't have something that's that simple around me, I'm not going to get that job done of capture. And that creates more stress in my life, and that it makes things messier. And so that's how I use data, just for me personally.
All right. So the object of this podcast is to change people's mindset, to make them think different with data. Mm-hmm. So I want to even take that even farther. So we're talking about the things that are obvious, because it's obvious that we're capturing the biometric type stuff and the things that are on our watch. Mm-hmm. But do you capture data that is not as obvious? For example, when do you do your hardest work during the day?
The morning time.
Okay. Randomly selected? Did you create a Google spreadsheet on it? How did you come up with morning time?
So when I found out that I was a good worker in the morning, it was before I really started tracking all of that. But It was around the same time that I was getting into data on a professional level as well. And so the majority of work I was doing was with data, because we had a call center software that we got that it had hundreds of different metrics that it captured, and I put a lot of effort into figuring out which metrics meant what and how they correlated and things like that. But I came to understand that I thought cleaner in the morning.
Okay.
And that's where it started. And so once I realized that I was thinking cleaner, meaning I could hyper focus. I could jump into data and then not pick my head up for 2 hours and then be completely fine. But then in the afternoon, I wasn't getting the same kind of traction. I worked out at lunch, and then I would eat, and then afterwards, I was, I felt sluggish. Yeah. Like I'd have to pull I was using a stand-up desk at the time, and I'd have to pull the stool up to the desk and sit back on it, because I didn't have the same punch I had in the morning. And so from a measurable perspective, my work output was just more in the morning time.
And so what's the goal, right? What's your intention there? Is it work? Is it productivity? Is it spending less time on work? Because when you focus on work, if it takes you 2 hours, that's better than when you're unfocused and it took you 5 hours, right? Because we've all had that, where the same task at a different time just takes twice as long because you're just not into it. So what is your metric? What is it? Both? Why do you care about optimizing your time?
Well, so it is productivity, but I think optimizing productivity means that you're doing the things in the most optimal way possible. And so when it came to measuring my time, because I had to do time studies on the way that I work in order to understand better like where I'm wasting my time. And that's a common thing today, especially in the post-pandemic workforce, where you say, okay, here's your 8-hour day. Now break it down for me from a time perspective. And it's more of a live capture thing than it used to be. And there's a lot more tools now because remote managing is more difficult without those tools. And so I'm constantly working on improving my process for productivity by taking those bits of time that are a waste and automating them. And so I got into a position where a lot of my work was pulling information. And so we had somebody at G Squared who spent 2 hours a day just pulling information. And so we automated that task. And so productivity it encompasses all. And so for me personally, it was about how to get the job that I know I've got to get done, completed as quickly as possible, but then also it allows me to be proactive with the information as well. Because I'm not just using it for face value or to answer a question that I've got, but I've got to play in this experimental realm. I don't really know have a good way to say it, but just look at data for what data is going to tell me rather than what I'm asking it.
Yeah, and keep it simple, folks, right? It's always, I'm trying to attain a certain metric because it leads to a specific result. And then what leads up to that goes back to those features we talked about in the past, right? And so what are those different features? It could be time of the day, could be environment, could be the laptop that you have. I need 2 screens versus 1. There's so many different components that experience is enough for data sometimes. I don't have to write down that I did something on this day and it worked better. And I want everybody to think about that. I want you to think about when you wake up in the morning, what are you doing first? And if you're a morning person and you're doing email, you're wasting your best time of the day.
I agree.
If you're a night person, then and if you wake up in the morning and you want to do email, I still think that's the wrong thing, because I like to say I like to dictate the start of my day myself as opposed to through an email. Because a lot of times you get an email in the morning and it might be, I got a fire to put out.
Oh yeah.
I'd rather be productive first. So all of these little things, it's the data that you have to make yourself better and use data for good for you.
That's actually a good point. So one of the common things we talk about in the workplace is not getting swept away by the whirlwind.
Yeah.
And the whirlwind is just anything that's not planned. And so you've got that fire that you pull from your email first thing in the day. You are setting the precedent for the rest of the day.
So think about notifications, right? That's data. It's stuff that's being thrown at you. Please look at this data. Look at this data. Look at this data. Do you have notifications on your phone?
I do, but I completely get where you're coming from, because one of the common reoccurring issues with employees is when they're trying to get into their focus time, they keep their email application up. Yep. And even if you're not getting notifications, that's a big no-no, because you will glance at that subject line, and then the second that subject line plants itself in your brain, it's gonna split your thought or bifurcate it in a way that you're gonna have to take action on it, or it's gonna bother you.
Yeah, and I learned early on, I'm somebody that has a lot of meetings, and I love my meetings because I get to have these kind of conversations with people all the time, and usually it starts at 9, but I'm a 4:30 in the morning kind of guy. I wake up. I just wake up. It is what it is, folks. I get up with the chickens, whatever it is. But by 6 o'clock at night, I'm a pumpkin. I literally can't do anything. There's nothing productive about me at that point except being a good dad,
right?
And hopefully a good husband. So in the morning, I get up early. Man, I get 2 hours of focus time, and I'm usually done with those 2 hours before 7, 8 o'clock in the morning at work, and so that when the day does start, I don't feel this guilt of, oh my gosh, I still have, a couple hours. Because if I instead, did other things, or let's say I woke up late and I got to work when everybody else got to work, and I said those 2 hours in the middle of the day will be my productive time, I know that's not going to happen.
Not consistently, at least.
Yeah. And so my data in my head, my experiences have really changed what I do. So if I can get 2 hours of focus time and the rest of the time is with people, I know I've had a productive day, and that's what keeps me going in the direction that I want to go, which is being a productive person at work.
Right. And so to tie it back to where I started, so for you to be able to get up and have that time, that means you need to plan properly the day before and go to bed at the right time?
Put my clothes out the night before. I do it all. Yeah.
Do you really?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Oh, come on. Because
You lay your clothes out?
if I'm going to go for a run first,
Okay.
absolutely. Because if you put your clothes out, it's like forces you to put those running shoes on before you head out. I do. I don't want to think about that in the morning.
No, it makes sense. It's just that's very disciplined of you. And that's where I was really getting at is like you have informed your behaviors from data, but then you have to apply that in discipline.
Yeah.
And so that's like, do you think, and I guess this is a personal question for you since you're the one who gets up at 4:30, do you think that knowing like how the picture looks before you take the action helps you take the action? So does it give you that you're sitting there, you're looking at your running shoes. You got to put on your running shoes.
True.
Does knowing how this all plays out from a data perspective help you stand up to go put your shoes on?
A little bit. Let's not act like I'm Mr. Productivity. You know the real reason why I get my clothes the night before?
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to wake up my wife.
Okay.
She's not at 4:30. I've got 3 dogs. The minute I get up, they think it's time to eat.
Mm-hmm.
So I do everything possible to stay quiet. And if I'm turning on lights, it's going to wake up somebody in the house. So that's the real reason. But when I started doing that, I noticed this other benefit.
Okay.
And the benefit was if you plan the night before what you're going to do first thing in the morning, you actually do it. And if you plan the intent, and if it's what you want to do, and it starts you off in the right direction, your day is a little bit better. And I think my goal these days, and I love to be productive. I love to do quality work.
Mm-hmm.
It really is to unplug at 6.
Yeah.
That's my goal.
Yeah.
And if I still have work I haven't finished, I have a hard time sitting with my wife to watch a great show without a laptop. And that's not fair to her.
Yeah. It's splitting your attention at that time.
Yeah. So my goal might be different than somebody else's, but I think what we're trying to, really encapsulate here by talking about the personal side of data for good is the fact that you have to think differently about it if you want to do real action. Because, hey, you all know I'm the crazy guy that's been logging my food forever. Well, logging food and doing nothing about it is just a waste of time. So making it actionable means you have to think a little bit differently and hopefully, taking a little bit different approach to how you see that data or your experiences can actually help use data for good.
Mm-hmm. To go back to the morning time thing,
Sure.
Growing up, I refused to believe that I was a morning person.
Everybody thinks they should stay up all night, and I get my best work done at 1 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
I've known since I was 6 years old that wasn't me.
No, it took me about 34 years.
So you would stay up late, or?
Yeah. That's why I focus on sleep so much, is because when it comes to, I've got a couple of small kids. When it comes to bedtime, I could go to bed, or I could have some me time.
Yeah.
And so it's like my selfish attitude towards like free time leads me to sleep less sometimes.
Yeah. Well, my favorite thing in the world to do is drink a cup of coffee in the morning. So it's almost like I crave that more than having the beer at night. So I would rather plan for my mornings than to plan for my nights. So it's a little bit enjoyable. It's a little bit of productivity, and it's also being considerate to my family.
Yeah.
There's multiple aspects that make my decision making better.
Mm-hmm. And so would you say your ultimate goal is just to be present wherever you're at by setting things up on not necessarily rails, but just getting a good form to your day?
That's a great way of saying it. So when I'm focused, I'm focused.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm with people, I'm with people.
Yeah.
And I'm with my family, I should be with my family.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying I'm perfect at that.
Yeah.
By all means, I'm not. But I do what I can. I turn off almost every notification, keeping my parents and my wife as ones that get through, and that's about it.
Yeah, I have noticed that anytime I go to text you after a certain time, it says, these texts will be silenced.
Yeah.
Do you want to push them through? I never push them through because I don't want to be rude.
Well, maybe I need to add you to my favorites. But it's a very small group, and it's mostly people with the last name Apigian.
Rightfully so.
Yeah, for sure. So I know I love talking about this topic, but really I got to talk about my favorite thing,
Okay.
which is talking about how to use data in a community way and what that really means. And so when I say community and data for good, what are some of the things that what comes to mind for you?
So from my experience, using data for good on a community level has come from a program that I'm involved with called Elite. It's Emerging Leaders in Technology. It's like folks who have the hard skill sets that are learning the more soft skill sets that come with management, and they each pick up a project every year. And this is all, they pay to be there. They're learning stuff, but they've also kind of volunteered to work with community, nonprofits and things like that. And I've seen them go in and like evaluate the data for companies in ways that makes them more efficient. That brings out issues that they didn't even know they had because they didn't understand what they were looking at, and empowered them to make better decisions that makes them a better nonprofit. And nonprofits are out there specifically to help the community. And so that's my limited experience with that. And I assume that there's public programs all across the nation that do something like that. But I'm very intrigued with your approach with the Data Collaborative, because that's hyper focused on we're using this tool, which is data, to accomplish things.
Yeah, and I'll try not to take too much time in giving some context here, but I think it's important to tell my little story over the last year, because it's really changed what I think data for good is. Because I've been saying using data for good, good, and that is really important. But I feel like there's really an opportunity to do good, and it can be at a massive level, and data can be at the forefront of that. And so when I first got the job at Belmont, a former senator of Tennessee, U.S. Senator Dr. Bill Frist, approached Belmont about disparities within Nashville from a health perspective. He's concerned that within Nashville, there's too much of a variance in terms of health and well-being. And what can we do about that? And he felt opening the data up to everybody was the best approach to that. So we brought tons of people together. We had these great conversations. We had about 50 people that were very passionate about this. And as we're going through this, most want to go to patient data. And I'm like, there's hundreds of people doing patient data. What can we do at the community level? How can we set the community up for better results? And what we decided to do is we focused on one particular topic, and this was hypertension. We identified community level data. So when I say community level data, that means it's aggregated to a certain level. It could be U.S. Census Tract, it could be zip code, but you start looking at neighborhoods as opposed to people.
Right.
Because where you live, I firmly believe the environment has something to do with your health and well-being. And so can we see that in the data was our first assumption. And then as we went from that using hypertension, what we said is, you know what? Let's go for it. Let's get all of the publicly available data in the state of Tennessee. Let's put it in one big data warehouse. And what made that key was it had to integrate together. So education data, crime data, health data, U.S. Census Tract data, the American Consumer Survey data, all had to connect together so that you didn't know where you were pulling from. You just knew you were pulling data so that it's connected. And so then if I wanted to look at where is there the highest risk for hypertension, and we're doing it at the zip code level, we can see it. 37208 is that place in Nashville. What other demographic features that are actionable can we look at? And because we can't just say to those people, stop having high hypertension, right? Yeah. But can we offer better food choices? Because maybe that's an indication. Okay,
so let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this, right? Sure. So you're taking multiple sets of data that are location based,
and
year to determine different aspects of hypertension or hypertension rates.
Yeah, and think of it as a funnel. So at the top, you're looking at like a bird's eye view of the geographic location that you're looking at. whether it's Nashville, the state of Tennessee, could be Baltimore. And we're just looking at it and saying, tell me something about the landscape of this location. So I'm going to be specific and just say Nashville.
Okay.
And we've got, let's say, 26 different zip codes that we're looking at. Which ones stick out the most? So map view, right? Put it in a map, color the polygons on the map, and the darker ones mean there's higher hypertension, and you start to see patterns. And now you start seeing that. Now what you're trying to get to, going back to the idea of features that lead to hypertension, start looking at the data that you have that is high also there, but lower in other places. And so is it education levels? Is it income? Is it affordable housing? Which housing insecurity is a huge indicator of health and well-being. Is it where there's reliable food sources? We have a feature called walkability, and which talks to the sidewalks in that area, the number of trails that are within a mile or 10 miles of a given location. All of that becomes data that you can look at the top view. And then you start continuing to dive in until you get down to the individual. But you got to start at the top so you're not trying to do everything at once. It's trying to find the most important aspects, and in this case, it's location.
Sure.
So that's our starting point. And if we do that, we're able to now take that data and bring it to the individuals that are actually doing the good. So here's where it becomes data-driven, a data-driven approach to using data for good. Am I going to go solve everybody's problem? I'm the data guy, right? What's my superpower? It's empowering others.
Okay.
And so we then created this group called Healthy Community Insights, made up of data people. And we analyzed the data. We created a report, which was a starting point. It wasn't the final, right? Remember, insights don't lead to action.
Right.
Got to go to the story. Then we went and met with all the nonprofits. And here's what we found out about nonprofits. And here's where I want to empower people out there to do more. The nonprofits are amazing. Usually started because something happened in their personal life. Could be a family member, it could be something to them, and they feel compelled to do something. They start the nonprofit, and over time, they're just trying to keep the nonprofit going. And it's hard. It's not a lot of money. There's a lot of turnover, and they never, ever look at their data. They don't have time. They don't have the resources. They definitely don't have the money.
Okay.
So they're going out with a shotgun approach. I'm going to go help this area. Why? Because it's down the street. But the area they really need is west of that, or whatever it is. Can we arm them with the data that they need to be more strategic or to go after better opportunities? And that's what we try to do. And so right now, we've actually, with a nonprofit called Nashville Health, created a coalition of nonprofits, also tons of help from the Center for Nonprofit Management in Nashville. And we've got these nonprofits, at least 20 of them, different sectors, different missions, all working together, looking at the data to help the health and well-being of specific neighborhoods in Nashville.
Okay. So just to make sure that I've got my head wrapped around it. So you can, and I'm going to make up a couple of things here because I don't know what the actual data said. But so you were talking about looking at things from a zip code level and all that kind of stuff. And that seems pretty broad. But as you come down the funnel, like you could potentially, say this address, like you mentioned food deserts earlier. Like, just to be clear, is there a specific definition to food desert, or is it just not accessible, or food's not accessible?
No, there is. If you're in an urban environment, it's either a half mile or a mile away from a reliable food source.
Okay.
If you're in a rural area, it's 10 miles.
Okay.
And so Nashville, 70% of Nashville is a food desert.
That doesn't surprise me.
I mean, you just have to go around the streets to see that. But remember the whole story thing that we've talked about? When I say that 70%, everybody remembers that. And that's pretty jarring to think that. Another point, if you think about, telling the story, if somebody has hypertension, they lose 5 years of their life. That's the life expectancy that it goes down. It's 5 years based on the fact that they have hypertension. I mean, that's, do you want 5 years back? I know I want those 5 years.
There's a reason I don't smoke.
and you eat healthy and you do the things to make sure that you don't get to certain metrics.
So back to getting my head wrapped around it still
Sure.
though. So as you're coming down the funnel to get more precise information, you've established that like 70% of the city is in a food desert. So how many fast food restaurants have to be closer to a person's residence before they're likely to have hypertension?
That's a great question. And we have looked at, that's the kind of data you go and find. And you got to literally manually a lot of times go and find that. And so you start finding the zip codes where there's problems and you start adding that stuff up and you say, how many grocery stores, how many fast food restaurants, and see what happens. Then do that for the area that's really low in hypertension and see the difference. Are there primary care clinics there? Which you find out a lot of times where there's a need, there's not a hospital because it's usually low income, underrepresented populations, and hospitals don't always go where they are unless they're mission driven. If they're profit driven, then they're going to go where people will pay. So you have that as an added issue. So all of that becomes really important when starting at the top of the funnel, again, identifying those areas.
Okay.
So can I take it down a little bit down that funnel? And so let's go back to the idea of the goal.
Okay.
So let's say you're a food bank and I've had this conversation with a food bank in Nashville. They do amazing work. They do a lot of work with the refugee populations that come in to Nashville and help them get food, help them get started. When I went to them and said, what is your goal? What do you think they said?
To deliver food to those in need.
Okay. And I said, that's not your goal.
Okay.
And they're like, they were taken aback. And I'm like, I would think your goal is for them not to come back.
Okay.
And in other words, get off of dependency because you want everybody to flourish, because the idea of helping people is so that they can be self-sufficient. Being self-sufficient makes people happier. When they're happier, they're helping others, which means there's more people that are being taken off of dependency of services. So a food bank, to me, is the perfect hub for identifying opportunities of resources to get them off of that dependency.
Okay.
So now a food bank can kind of change their thinking, is instead of just thinking of themselves as, I got to get food, which by the way, if that's all they do, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Right? People are hungry. They find partners that are willing to give them reliable food. And the people I've met at these food banks are just absolutely amazing. It is the most inspiring thing to go to an old church and see them just bringing out carts of food, usually 2 weeks worth, and giving it to a family in need. It is amazing. But they've got them there. What else can they provide, whether it's a partner or another service that they offer that can make that individual get off of dependency? Now we're starting to really use data for good.
So you're filling out so I'm trying to wrap my head around the concept of additional services, additional good, whatever you want to call it. And so you've got a captive audience, and your service is meant to be a stepping stone, not a dependency.
Right.
And so if you're going to do that effectively, where do you go from there?
Yeah. So what is the reason that they came to the food bank? Think about that. What is the reason? And if you can fix the reason, then they don't have to come back to the food bank. If you're a refugee, you came from a country, there's some type of war, whether you're Afghan population, the Ukrainians that are now coming over to the United States. Number one, do you speak English? If you don't, how are you going to get a job?
That's a good question.
So now you've got them coming to the food bank because at least they've gotten to that point. That's wonderful. Now, what about ESL courses, English as a second language? What about, if you look at all the people coming over, these are engineers, they're scientists, they're teachers. These are regular people like you and I, just don't speak the language.
Yeah.
We know that takes time. Is there other training that we can give them? Can you partner with companies where they do have a couple of people that speak that language and they can have a job? May not pay all the bills, but it pays some. Those are the kind of things. So it's called in the nonprofit community collective impact.
Okay.
So just giving you food is not going to raise you above to being to prosperity by yourself.
Sure.
But giving you some food for today, which is intervention, right? It's helping you today, and then giving you some things to prevent you from coming back. ESL classes, technical training, a mentor, a caseworker, things all of those things combined leads to getting off of the dependency. And we can see that in the data. So that's why I think data matters, because there's not a magic bullet. It's not one thing out there. It's multiple things. And if you get to the root of why they're coming, a lot of times those are things that are preventable if you take the care and find the right partners to do good.
So that's like the give a man a fish, he eats for a day, teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime.
So how do you teach them to fish? Right?
I like that. I've never heard the term collective impact before, but that makes sense. That if you are, if you're a food bank and you've got the capacity to deliver other, potentially like solutions that are good for the person or the refugee in this case, like that makes a lot of sense why you would do that. And so how, from your perspective of like the data-driven approach, how do you tie those collective services together? Yeah,
and it's hard because we are trying to figure out how to measure impact, like societal impact. That is, and what we normally do is we equate it to things that are easy to measure. Unemployment rate, median household income, those are things, but that doesn't make you happy. And what we really want to get to is when we look at impact, what really is a thriving community? What makes up those components? I don't have the answer yet, but I hope in 2 years while we're doing this, I'm gonna come in here and say I've got it. And because we're actively looking at that and seeing how can we really measure impact. But as we go, we have ideas of it. And what we really see is the features that lead to needing an intervention, needing food, needing housing, needing clothing, needing a job. We can start to see that. And it's not just refugees, right? People that are born in the United States need help too.
Yeah.
And something happened early that pivoted them to the wrong path. And is there things that we can find that are good indications of if we do this, or this person, if we provide this opportunity for teenagers within this one zip code, they're more likely to do this as opposed to that. Those are the kind of things that you're trying to figure out. And let me tell you, it's not a science at this point. It's a lot.
So I feel personally that socioeconomic status is tied to like a lot of, not happiness directly, because you don't have to have money to be happy, but you do have to have enough money to not stress out all the time about stuff. And you do have to have enough money to buy the groceries that are, that's not just like the fast food, like heavy sugar and preservatives, gunk and stuff like that. But would, going to your measure, would socioeconomic status be like a measure of success? Or is that a front runner right now? And the intent is to build like a data set going forward through surveys and self-reporting, and just because you've got to get a large enough, like I don't know, body of work or data set to where you can see through the noise.
Yeah, and basically it's not the only thing, right? And we keep using it as the only indication.
Okay.
And so what are those other things that are hard to measure, but we're getting better at it. And what we have to identify is if we're going to go out and try to do good in the community, figure out the metrics on the front end so that we are measuring those over time and we have that data available to us. And then hopefully that, it could be as simple as you came to a food bank and you now have a job, right? I mean, it's as simple as that. That's okay. You don't have to know how many times they smiled in the day.
Right.
But that is pretty good. That's pretty powerful.
I wonder if we'd mentioned before, like ingesting our own personal metadata.
Sure.
I wonder if there's already answers in there that if we had access to our own data that we could use to kind of self-determine how happy we are.
I'll tell you what, I think the person that creates the perfect metric for happiness is going to be the savior. I think at some point, the data savior, because it is important to truly get to the meaning of why we are looking at impact within a community. But we do have some ideas. There's certain things. For example, people usually live longer when they're part of a community or a tribe. You start seeing that. We know there's certain types of diets that lead to longer life, but there's a lot of debate of that. But not being lonely, having a certain amount of money does matter. Because you don't have to have all the money in the world, but you do have to have enough to survive. And if you have a problem, you can go to the doctor. So we're starting to see some indications that are really important. Everything though always comes back to, and I think it's three things. I've only mentioned two so far: the person and the community. What's between those two is really important, and that's the family.
Okay.
That I have no good measures for, but if you have an ailment, Charlie, and all I do is tell you to go do something, you've got to have family support a lot of times, and you have to have a community to back you up as well, because you got to drive places. And what if you can't drive? You need to take off a day of work. You need to have a community around you that embraces that and says, go do that. So there's all these different components that goes from the person. That's why using data for good for you is important. For the family, is in understanding that that's a support function. So don't forget about the family. And then of course the community. And you're starting to see that in healthcare. You're starting to see that the insurance companies care about the family, and they start promoting activities for the family that are usually for health and wellness reasons.
Yeah. So I feel like that's exclusionary.
Sure.
It excludes a certain group of people, because not everybody's like married up and kids, and not everybody lives around their family and whatnot. But I thought I was with you until you went into like the healthcare, caring about the the family and the impact and whatnot. But would you consider because I have a lot of family that's I call them my non-bio family.
Sure.
It's my my godsons.
That's family. Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah, so that's still family.
Yeah, I mean, whether it's your tribe, your family, I don't know the people have used different, but I do see a difference between your environment and your family. So you're right, because my wife and I, we don't have any other Apigians other than our kids in this area, but we had this incredible support tribe around us of other families that had kids the same age. And, we had 4 kids and there was only 2 cars. We couldn't get kids everywhere. We relied on our support structure more so than those that do have, 5 siblings in the area, things like that.
So the impact of data in this particular conversation is that making money is good, being a part of a community is good, but then having folks that have your back is very important as well.
It is, and then get to the root of why there's need. I think that's important, and it could go to the family level, the personal level, but a lot of times it is at the community level. A lot of times jobs, it's not that the person can't work. It's not that they're not capable of working. It's they need childcare.
Yeah.
And they need a reliable transportation. Let me tell you, transportation is huge when it comes to the impact that you can have on a person's health and well-being.
I bet, especially living in Nashville.
Living in Nashville where there's not good public transportation, to say the least.
Yeah.
And so you need a car to be able to get around. that's a huge problem. And not everybody has great internet to have that remote job. You go to the rural areas of Tennessee, how do they get a job? They don't have good internet. There's no childcare around them. To get to the local metropolitan area is a 50-minute drive. They do the 50-minute drive.
Yeah.
Or move closer, which is not affordable,
Right.
as we now know in so many places in the United States that housing has gone through the roof. So, I mean, I don't even know if you can live in Nashville making $50,000 without other incomes coming in and buy a home.
You'd be house poor.
Very
Absolutely.
much so. And so, we've actually looked at affordable housing and housing insecurity within Nashville, and that is a huge indicator of so many things. If you're not in a secure home as a child, you are twice as likely to not finish high school.
Really?
And I'm just telling what the data is telling us. And so you start looking at the community level, that really starts to think, okay, so there's some things that we really have to work on if we are going to, take care of the people within our community.
So if, back to the statement of goals. So if I were a nonprofit that wanted to focus on what you were just talking about, would I state a goal as I'm looking to work with communities in order to provide consistent long-term housing that's affordable? Or is that way too big of a goal?
I don't think it's too big of a goal at all. I think it's very mission driven to the point where you have to now say why. Think about that. Can a city where service is really important, right? Has tons of restaurants. Who works at those restaurants? Is it people making $250,000, or is it people that are just making a living?
Yeah.
And are you now making those people travel 50 minutes to get to their waitress or waiter job? That's why you hear so often that restaurants can't hire.
Right.
It's not that there's not people. They're just not people close enough
Yeah.
that can get to you because they don't have reliable transportation. They live an hour away. There's not good public transportation. And they have no choice but to find employment elsewhere.
Yeah.
And so there's these components of data that are, we've used the word before, it's a proxy for what's actually happening. So don't look at the data itself as the end result or the real feature. It's what does that represent? And then you start really getting to it, because the truth is housing has gone up. But if you looked at it on the average for the United States in Nashville, it hasn't gone up. We're not out of whack compared to the rest of the United States.
Really?
What's happened is our wages haven't gone up at the same rate.
Oh, yeah.
And so wages have stayed the same. So what's the real problem? Is it that prices have caught up to the rest of the United States, or that the salaries are still suppressed here in Nashville? And so that gets to a lot of the underlying problems. So what do you do? Is it more of, we just retrain everybody to now become data ninjas?
No, that's me. That's only me.
It's only you. So we only have one data ninja. So we have to look for data disciples, right?
Yeah, there we go.
There we
Disciples.
go. Which is not feasible either, because obviously not everybody's meant to be a data ninja or a data disciple. But how do you find those underlying meanings? The data a lot of times tells us that.
Yeah. I've heard you tell, actually the first time I heard this was from you talking about it on a shared committee call, but you were talking about aptitude versus interest when it comes to, if you're going towards the problem of income and increasing income, well, how do you share the fact that there's all these jobs out here that require a specific skill set? And I always thought that was big. And so can you just briefly explain that, but then specifically the data tied to it?
Yeah. So aptitude versus interest. So first of all, so much is tied to education. Education leads to obviously good jobs. And education doesn't have to be degrees, but it has to be a certain type of education. Well, the path you take in life usually is based on your interest. It's not based on what you're good at. So aptitude is usually what means what you're good at, but a lot of times people pick their career path because of the TV shows they watch, because of current events, or because of a situation in their life. A good example is somebody that had something traumatic in their lives, got some help, and just saw the great work that the nurses were doing, and that put them on the path to becoming a nurse.
Yeah.
I know so many former athletes that become PT people, either a physical trainer or in that realm because they had an injury. They saw that. They saw how they helped people and came up with that as their career. So they saw it, that they had an interest. Does that mean they're good at it? And what happens is if you're not good at something, but you have an interest in it, over time, you're probably going to move on to something else. And so, and this is me coming up with a hypothesis here. I believe that if you find somebody's aptitude, and you can find that as early as 8th grade, there's a company called U-Science that has developed a metric that does a really good job with that. And you expose them to that, they will have an interest in it and they will continue on that path. And then they'll be down a path of something they're good at, which means they'll enjoy it and they will prosper in the end.
Okay.
And so that's what I go to when I think of aptitude versus interest. I didn't know I was good at data until the age of 30. I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be in marketing. I wanted to be the next Gordon Gekko. Wasn't that the one? Greed is good guy, the stockbroker.
I have no
I'm
idea.
even dating before you. Movies from the 80s, folks. Was that Wall Street? I think is what the name of that one was.
With Michael Douglas in it?
Yeah.
No, I never watched that.
Well, good for you. You didn't waste 2 hours of your day. But I wanted all these different things except what I knew I was good at. And if I just looked at who I was as a child, I would have known that. But I didn't get that exposure that I needed to see that I had an aptitude for it. And I should have followed that path. Luckily, I found it late, but at least I found it.
So the context in which we were talking about that was tech jobs and specifically like bringing up bringing up the average wage, like raising the floor of wages in Tennessee, because there's tons of tech jobs to be had. There's vacancies that we can't fill right now in this area. And so I think I don't know if you remember this stat or not, but you said something to the effect of females specifically have about a 10 to 15% interest, but over a 90% aptitude.
And that was specific to a specific county that I was analyzing their data. It was actually, I think, 65% aptitude.
Okay.
But it was 10
It was
to 15%.
something staggering.
Yeah. I mean, and why is that? Why do they not? Is it because of the social norms more than the fact that girls just don't like technology? Because I'll tell you right now, I see a lot. What I see in the tech field is early on, 18 years old, it's about 16% of the student population is female. When you get to master's level, it's about 33 to 50%. When I look at the professionals in the IT space that are at manager or above, it almost is 50-50. But they get to it late is what ends up happening.
Okay.
Wouldn't it be great if we hit all of those individuals, male and female, early on? You have an aptitude for this. Let's expose you to it and then let you choose that path.
Yeah.
Too many people are finding their path too late in life. So data can help you find it earlier. If they find it earlier, we now have found a root cause of, societal good, right? Because now there's people that will not have to worry about dependency on others. They will, of course, help others. And it just makes from a community perspective, hopefully more good. And that is based on the data that we have. So it goes back to this idea of data for good for the individual, of course, for the family or tribe around that person, and then, of course, for the community. And the reason I think it's important to talk community is the only way for that to work is not individually. It's got to be within the school system. It has to be systematic. It has to be part of what you do. You have to teach a little bit differently. You have to do things a little bit differently at a community level to affect many.
Yeah. So going back to that specific example of, that data, like I feel like that has put a lot of effort, or not a lot of effort, a lot of pressure on the state of Tennessee to do something. And, we've recently passed a computer science bill that's going to have exposure to, to comp sci, ideas all the way down into elementary school by 2028. And so that's real change based off of data.
Yep. Yeah. And a lot of it was because of the tech community stepping up and stating the case.
Yeah.
And they did it with data. And that's empowering to see that. And we have so many people here in Nashville that are passionate about doing good. And here's, I'm gonna move it to the people that are listening.
Okay.
And think about this. Most people in their jobs, they love their jobs. I'm not gonna say there's a bad thing about it, but a lot of times it becomes monotonous. In other words, if you're a data person, a lot of times you're doing the exact same thing. You're looking at the exact same data and you want more. So wouldn't it be cool if the more part was actually helping somebody? So if we had an opportunity for me to take my data that I've brought together and start giving it to everybody. That's what I'm doing now. We've got belmontdata.org. And if you go to that, you click on Roundtable and it brings you to a mapping feature that shows you all of our data in our data warehouse, and you can download it. It's all yours. It's publicly available. We're not exposing anybody's data. And you can now take data and do good with it. And so if we have a challenge out there, what features matter the most for hypertension? And we give you that data. We can have people from all over. We're already talking to some user groups that are going to use this data to inform us on the right things to do. So actually having data competitions out there, using data for good is something I think that will create this incredible ecosystem that I think would be really fun to be part of. I'm a big thinker, and maybe that's a little bit too much, but I do believe, and it's not just Nashville alone, that there's people out there that want to help. There's people that want to give money, but you know what they don't want to do? They don't want to give money to things that aren't going to move the needle. They don't want to give their time to things that won't move the needle. But if from a data perspective, if we're able to show by doing this, it leads to something good, you get people more likely to want to chip in. That's
true. But then if we go back to one of the first statements in today's podcast, we were talking about or good for profit.
Sure.
And it feels like there's a way to have your cake and eat it too. Have you seen anything like that going on where, like a charitable cause turns into a profitable product or business or anything like that?
Or the other way around too. You have a profitable business and feel like you're giving back, and that became a marketing ploy for a long time. The ones that say they're carbon neutral, right?
Okay.
Well, I hope they're actually carbon neutral. And if they're doing it just for marketing's sake, but they're actually doing it, that's still good.
Yeah.
Right. So the opportunity for doing good, what you're seeing is, I believe, our 18 to 24-year-olds are awesome. I firmly believe that. I believe that our younger generation is amazing. They want to change the world. They really do. So if I give them a data set and say, let's change the world, they're on board.
Yeah.
So companies know that now too. And so they say, hey, we have to give the perception at least that we're doing that. And by the way, data's out there. If we're not actually doing it, we're going to get in trouble, and we're going to be in the news that we're doing bad when we're saying we're doing good. So we better actually do this. And maybe for profit equals for good in a roundabout way.
I mean, it does, like, motivation doesn't really matter. So even if it is like we're 100% spending money on this or allocating time to this for our own benefit, the mutual motivation or benefit doesn't disappear.
That's right, and that's why there's incentives to do certain things. And I don't have a problem with that at all, because there's multiple factions that a company has to satisfy. And if part of that is doing good, and you're seeing this huge influx of companies that are, okay, we're going to do that, but maybe we can also offset some of the environmental damage that's been done. And if we get some good publicity out of it, that's great. But you're seeing it more and more. And I think that's a good thing.
Oh, good. I'm looking forward to witnessing the transition of like what it means to be happy through data as it happens.
Yeah, and I think where some of that comes to is I'm always going to be Mr. Positive. I see good things a lot of times. I get to meet a lot of the people that are doing wonderful things, and for some reason they think I'm a magician with data. They're not. It's more of knowing that by giving them just a little insight and helping them craft the right story and the right goals, it's amazing the work that can get done. And I've seen it over and over again. And so that's really empowering. So I have this great image of the future. I really do. I believe that science is awesome and data can be used for good. I also think there's going to be bumps and bruises along the way.
Yeah.
But overall, I do believe that we can use data for good. And maybe we have more conversations like this. We'll get more people on board for it.
Absolutely. So the thing the last thing I wanted to call out is we've mentioned storytelling multiple times already, and I'm sure a part of what you're doing when you're communicating this stuff to the communities and to the volunteers in the communities is you're building the story, and that goes back to the podcast we had earlier with Zach. That storytelling, using data, like all of this stuff it's here to stay, and it's not going anywhere. And so we're trying to grab onto it and build around it in a way that is meaningful and impactful. Because I 100% believe in everything you've said. Like we're on a trajectory that we can't change at this point.
Sure.
And it's about making sure that we do it as well as we can, not knowing fully what the future looks like.
Yeah. And so like what you just said, the tools are out there, right? The ability to storytell, the tools to create insights. The part that's missing is the mindset to go along with it. And if we can keep changing the mindset to truly don't be satisfied with the shallow answer of what's the goal. Get to the deep meaning of it. Understand what is, when you see a feature and say, this leads to this, what does that feature really mean? What is it representing? And then take that representation of the data and turn that into a story. You can do great stuff.
Nice.
And so what do you think? We've hit this pretty hard. I think the fact is we're always going to talk data. We're always going to talk data for good. But maybe this gives everybody a primer on where we're coming from.
Yeah, I think so.
I think then we've accomplished what we want today. So I guess we're putting a pin in it.
Yep.
Sounds good. So again, everybody, thank you again for listening to Data for All. I'm Charlie Apigian.
And I'm Charlie Linden.
And we'll see you next time.